I think, let me answer what I said before. I think most people, when they use that term, include sexual relationships and whatever other sexual contact is involved in a particular relationship. But they think it includes intercourse as well. And I would thought so before I got into this case and heard all I've heard and seen all I've seen. I would have thought that that's what nearly everybody thought it meant.
Well, I ask, Mr. President, because you're using the very document, Grand Jury Exhibit 4, WJC 4, represented to Judge Wright, his understanding of the meaning of that affidavit, which you've indicated you thought, Ms. Lewinsky thought she was referring just to intercourse. He says to Judge Wright that it meant absolutely no sex of any kind in any manner, shape, or form.
Well, let me say this. I didn't have any discussion, obviously, at this moment with Mr. Bennett. I'm not even sure I paid much attention to what he was saying. I was ready to get on with my testimony here, and they were having these constant discussions all through the deposition. But that statement in the present tense, at least, is not inaccurate, if that's what Mr. Bennett meant. That is, at the time that he said that, and for some time before, that would be a completely accurate statement. Now, I don't believe that he was, I don't know what he meant. You'd have to talk to him, because I just wasn't involved in this, and I didn't pay much attention to what was being said. I was just waiting for him to get back to me. So I can't comment on or be held responsible for whatever he said about that, I don't think.
Well, do you agree with me that if he misled Judge Wright in some way, that you would have corrected the record and said, excuse me, Mr. Bennett, I think the judge is getting a misimpression by what you're saying?
If Mr. Bennett was representing me, I wasn't representing him. And I wasn't even paying much attention to this conversation, which is why when you started asking me about this, I asked to see the deposition. I was focusing on my answers to the questions. And I've told you what I believe about this deposition, which I believe to be true. And it's obvious, and I think by your questions you have betrayed that the Jones lawyer's strategy in this case had nothing to do with uncovering or proving sexual harassment. By the time this discovery started, they knew they had a bad case on the law, and they knew what our evidence was. They knew they had a lousy case on the facts. And so their strategy, since they were being funded by my political opponents, was to have this dragnet of discovery. They wanted to cover everybody, and they convinced the judge, because she gave them strict orders not to leak, that they should be treated like other plaintiffs in other civil cases, and how could they ever know whether there had been any sexual harassment unless they first knew whether there had been any sex. And so with that broad mandate, limited by time and employment in the federal or state government, they proceeded to cross the country and try to turn up whatever they could. Not because they thought it would help their case. By the time they did this discovery, they knew what the deal was in their case, and they knew what was going to happen, and Judge Wright subsequently threw it out. Now, let me finish, Mr. Bennett. You brought this up. Excuse me, Mr. Bittman. What they wanted to do, and what they did do, and what they had done by the time I showed up here, was to find any negative information they could on me, whether it was true or not, get it in a deposition, and then leak it, even though it was illegal to do so. It happened repeatedly. The judge gave them orders. One of the reasons she was sitting in that deposition was because she was trying to make sure that it didn't get out of hand. But that was their strategy, and they did a good job of it, and they got away with it. I've been subject to quite a lot of illegal leaking, and they had a very determined, deliberate strategy because their real goal was to hurt me. When they knew they couldn't win the lawsuit, they thought, well, maybe we can pummel him. Maybe they thought I'd settle. Maybe they just thought they would get some political advantage out of it. But that's what was going on here. Now, I'm trying to be honest with you, and it hurts me, and I'm trying to tell you the truth about what happened between Miss Lewinsky and me. But that does not change the fact that the real reason they were zeroing in on anybody was to try to get any person in there, no matter how uninvolved with Paula Jones, no matter how uninvolved with sexual harassment, so they could hurt me politically. That's what was going on, because by this time, this thing had been going on a long time. They knew what our evidence was. They knew what the law was in the circuit in which we were bringing this case. And so they just thought they would take a wrecking ball to me and see if they could do some damage.
Judge Wright had ruled that the attorneys in the Jones case were permitted to ask you certain questions.
She certainly did, and they asked them, and I did my best to answer them. I'm just trying to tell you what my state of mind was.
To answer those questions truthfully, Mr. President.
It was. But it was not my responsibility in the face of their repeated illegal leaking. It was not my responsibility to volunteer a lot of information. There are many cases in this deposition where I gave, and keep in mind, I treated them, frankly, with respect. I prepared very well for this deposition on the Jones matters. I prepared very well on that. I did not know that Linda Tripp had been involved in the preparation of this deposition, or that all of them. No, I don't. I just know that what I read in the papers about it. But I had no way of knowing that they would ask me all these detailed questions. I did the best I could to answer them. But in this deposition, Mr. Bittman, I was doing my best to be truthful. I was not trying to be particularly helpful to them, and I didn't think I had an obligation to be particularly helpful to them to further, when I knew that there was no evidence here of sexual harassment, and I knew what they wanted to do was to leak this even though it was unlawful to do so. That's what I knew.
President, that you had an obligation to make sure that the presiding federal judge was on board and had the correct facts. Did you believe that was your obligation?
Sir, I was trying to answer my testimony. I was thinking about my testimony. I don't believe I ever even focused on what Mr. Bennett said in the exact words he did until I started reading this transcript carefully for this hearing. That moment, that whole argument just passed me by. I was a witness. I was trying to focus on what I said and how I said it. And believe me, I knew what the purpose of the deposition was. And sure enough, by the way, it did all leak, just like I knew it would.
Let me ask you, Mr. President, you indicate in your statement that you were alone with Ms. Lewinsky. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
How many times were you alone with Ms. Lewinsky?
Let me begin with the correct answer. I don't know for sure. But if you would like me to give an educated guess, I will do that. But I do not know for sure. And I will tell you what I think based on what I remember. But I can't be held to a specific time because I don't have records of all of them.
How many times do you think?
Well, there are two different periods here. There's the period when she worked in the White House until April of '96. And then there's the period when she came back to visit me from February '97 until late December '97. Based on our records, let's start with the records where we have the best records and the closest in time. Based on our records between February and December, it appears to me that at least I could have seen her approximately 9 times. Although I do not believe I saw her quite that many times, at least it could have happened. We think there were 9 or 10 times when she was in the White House when I was in the Oval Office when I could have seen her. I do not believe I saw her that many times, but I could have. Now, we have no records for the time when she was an employee at the White House, because we have no records of that for any of the employees at the White House, unless there was some formally scheduled meeting that was on the calendar for the day. I remember, I'll tell you what I remember. I remember meeting her, or having my first real conversation with her during the government shutdown in November of '95, when she, as I explained in my deposition, during the government shutdown, most federal employees were actually prohibited from coming to work.